So our next speaker is Mr. Shannon Mead, and he's the CEO of No More Butts, which is an environmental charity that he founded after witnessing the devastating impact of cigarette butts on beautiful locations around the world. So Shannon was inspired to resign from his corporate role and dedicate himself to improving the natural environment by tackling one of the world's most pervasive and persistently littered items. So Shannon is currently in Paris for the second session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. And so I know that there's also a coalition of public health organisations that are attending that are there to advocate for a ban on cigarette filters as an unnecessary single-use plastic. So again, I'll just play Shannon's recorded presentation and then we'll cross to him live.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. This is a pre-record as I'm not able to be there in person. I'm in Paris for the second session of the intergovernmental negotiations into creating the Plastic Pollution Treaty. So the key messages I'd love you to walk away with today. So cigarette filters, also known as tobacco filters or cigarette butts, they are a single-use plastic. They provide no health benefits. They're the most littered item in the world. They pollute water, create microplastics. They're toxic, ubiquitous, problematic, avoidable and unnecessary, and should be banned. So who is No More Butts? We're a registered environmental charity based out of Queensland in Australia, but we operate across Australia and across the world. We work across several of the SDGs, with the most important one for us being life below water, but we also focus on responsible consumption and production, which on today, World No Tobacco Day, where we're highlighting the importance of food security over tobacco, it's also an important topic. So how big is the issue in Australia? Up to 8.9 billion cigarette butts are discarded into the environment every year. Now, some estimates show that's as low as 14%. Some estimates show it's up to 40% of all reported litter. But they're biodegradable, right? Well, actually, they're not. They're photodegradable. And most people in this room would realise that. They're made from a fibrous plastic known as cellulose acetate. It can actually take up to 15 years for a cigarette butt to break down in seawater. Now, research will show anywhere from 7, 12 to 14 years. But 15 years is actually taken from one of the tobacco companies' websites themselves. And how else can they cause harm? Well, chemicals begin leaching into the environment within an hour of being discarded, and they can cause damage to our marine life, soil and water. In addition, hundreds of fires every year, including bushfires, are attributed to smoking. So, are cigarette butts a single-use plastic? Yes, tobacco filters, cigarette filters, are a problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic. 1 year ago, on World No Tobacco Day 2022, the World Health Organization called for policymakers to consider banning plastic tobacco filters as a policy measure, noting that there is no evidence that they provide health benefits to smokers. This report and this release is available through the QR code available on your screen now. And then just a few weeks ago, the Belgian Superior Health Council provided a report to the Belgian Environment Minister at their request to actually do their own assessment on the impact of plastic tobacco filters on human health. The report was conclusive. It suggested that not only is there no evidence that they provide health benefit, there is a concern that they actually could cause human harm, as well as the continued environmental harm that plastic tobacco filters cause. That report in English is available if you scan the QR code now on your screen, which will prompt a PDF download. So we know the impact that cigarette filters have on the environment, but why were they introduced in the first place? So cigarette filters were introduced around about the 1920s and 30s, and by the 1950s had gained in popularity to a point where now 95, even 99% of all cigarettes sold include a plastic tobacco filter. But why were they introduced? So they were cheaper than tobacco leaf. So all of a sudden tobacco companies are paying 1/3 less to produce a cigarette. They provided comfort to smokers. They also offered convenience of being able to carry cigarette sticks and also having something to hold on. It was a way to introduce other flavours and textures such as menthol. And most importantly, it tried to falsely address the fact that cancers were becoming well known, and the term filter was used as a deception to suggest that by using filter, that you are harming yourself even less. So, are there any alternatives? So, there is no safer alternative. A ban is the best option. Removing plastic filters would solve only half the problem. If they were replaced with biodegradable filters, they would still persist in nature, even if they may break down in a shorter period of time. But they would still release toxins, they would still leach into the environment. More importantly, a biodegradable filter might give people more confidence that their product is biodegradable and therefore may see a higher rate of littering. The removal of plastic tobacco filters, or the removal of all filters, will obviously stop the impacts of not only plastic pollution, but also the bulk of any concerns of leaching. Will people litter more if all their littering is tobacco and paper? Maybe, but that will have a significantly less of an impact on the environment. What could the benefits be? Well, we know that they're going to be no less safe than cigarettes. So smokers who choose to continue to smoke are not going to be damaging their health or putting themselves at any further risk if they're smoking filterless cigarettes. But let's face it, they would likely to be less attractive for smokers and therefore more reasons to quit. And less consumption of plastic tobacco filters would of course be better for the environment. So what can we do? From a next steps perspective, I'd be advocating for the removal of plastic tobacco filters, in fact all tobacco filters, as part of state single-use plastic bans. This could be under the federal product stewardship initiatives, could be under the minister's priority list, or as part of the intergovernmental negotiations, which is what we're in Paris for. I would also encourage you to recommend the health counterparts that are either with you today in this session and listening in, or that you may be able to go back to consider the Belgian health report and consider preparing a similar report to create a position from Australia. We'd also request that either the Department of Health or the Department of Environment at a federal level would engage the Office of Impact Analysis to do a full feasibility study on the reality of removing tobacco filters. To sum up the key messages again, cigarette filters or tobacco filters, cigarette butts, they are a single-use plastic. They provide no health benefit. They are the most littered item in the world. They pollute water, create microplastics, toxic, ubiquitous, problematic, avoidable, and unnecessary, and they should be banned. If you'd like to check out more about No More Butts and what we do, find us, follow us, etc., you can do so by scanning the QR code. That will take you to all of our socials, which you can then follow. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day, and I'll now leave it for questions.
So thank you so much for getting up early for this Q&A session. Do we have any questions in the audience for Shannon?
Thanks, Shannon. That was really interesting. Have you got any data to suggest that a filter, even a biodegradable filter, would be more of a problem than the little bit of tobacco that will be and paper that will be inevitably left if there aren't filters on cigarettes in terms of the environmental impacts?
Yeah, I think that the primary environmental impact that we've been concerned with is the plastic itself, the cellulose acetate that can take anywhere up to 15 years. I said there's sort of a bit of research as to what happens there and the impact that that has on leaching, for example, the chemicals into water and over a prolonged period of time. And as it breaks up into thousands of microfibrous strands, also can become, sort of considered food or a food source. So I think the removal of the plastic tobacco filter is priority one. I think there are options which are starting to be touted globally as far as a biodegradable or a so-called safer alternative. It's not going to be any more safer for human health, and certainly for the environment. It just means that toxic chemicals and so on are released, and then the fibers are broken down in a quicker manner. So it really only solves half the problem. So we would say if there is the scientific research and confirmation now coming out saying that filters don't provide a human health benefit and are therefore unnecessary, our position would be, well, why should we be including it in something as well as the cigarette stick? So hopefully that answers the question.
Just a quick question. I was wondering, what kind of resistance are you, since you started working on this, you guys getting from both the industry and within governments?
Yeah, so it's been I guess a double-edged sword. So industry-wise, very early on, a few years ago, when there was opportunities to have those discussions, I guess in non-formal settings like at litter congresses and so on, where I actually threw this suggestion up on the board and had a chance to engage over the water cooler. And there was a response also that surely if there was an alternative, someone would have designed it by now because there's billions and billions of dollars in it. Their main focus, and I say this with a little bit of vomit in my mouth, is consumer satisfaction. So they want to make sure that the consumer is getting the best experience, and they believe that filters enable that. So certainly tobacco would not normally be on board. However, I think that they also realise that there is writing on the wall. There are plastic treaties coming. They have been investigating the biodegradable alternatives, deploying scientists to existing biodegradable companies. But also we all know that they've got their new game of vaping, and we really hope it doesn't become a negotiating point of, yes, we will do this, but we want more prevalence there. When it comes to government, government's actually neutral to positive. No one has said no. No one said it's not an option. It's a question of which policy measure, which legislation could that be enacted under? Is it under the New South Wales product, the sort of the Circular Economy and Plastics Reduction Bill? Is it under any of the state-based single-use plastic bans? Or are they waiting for an international globally binding instrument like out of Paris? Fingers crossed.
And I've got a question, if that's all right to put to you. So what's your sense of the mood in Paris, whether amongst those who are advocating for the policy of banning plastic filters as a single-use plastic item? Is there much confidence that this is something that may get up?
There's a strong network of control advocates here, and I think the interesting linkage with myself is that because we're environmentally focused, like obviously we care about human health, but our primary objective is to make sure there's no impact on the environment, and that's an area that the wider control network and health network hasn't necessarily explored. So there's, I think, 19 tobacco control health advocates, including representatives from the FCTC here also. And we're having a chance to engage, I won't use the term lobby, but talk to as many people as we can outside of plenary to ask if it's a considered position. I had a great discussion yesterday with the Ghana health minister, who was, I think, the chair of the FCTC when that was sort of implemented some time ago. So there is certainly interest. Is it a priority 1 or priority 10 topic to discuss? And the answer is probably not. Our position is that when it comes time to make the annexure to create the definitions of plastic and single-use plastic, problematic plastic, that tobacco filters are considered to be the first item on that list, because they are both problematic and they are unnecessary, as well as being toxic, etc.
Are there any other questions in the room? Well, I'll throw another one to you. What do you think would be the main barrier to implementing a ban?
Aside from the legislation, let's assume that we can find the right legislation. I think the sort of trying to take people on that journey, that what they've been used to and what they've grown up with over the last 70 plus years is actually not required and is to be removed. So I think there would certainly be a bit of pushback. But if we're talking about 10% of Australians and half of those littering, at the moment we're trying to accommodate, 95% of Australians are trying to accommodate a situation that 5% of Australians are creating. So I think there will be pushback on tobacco, there would be pushback from smokers, but I also think the positive on that is that a lot of people that are saying that they want to quit, want reasons to quit, and making it less comfortable for them, removing some of these textures and flavours and so on, I think is actually a positive step towards smoking cessation, as well as the natural environmental impacts that that's going to have.
Okay, and I've got an online question. How do you see that we can influence government to ensure the tobacco industry is not given the lead on measures outlined in the National Plastics Plan?
Yeah, I think FCTC is probably the word that we can dangle around and remind everyone of their obligations under Article 5.3 when it comes to engagement with tobacco. There is certainly provisions in there to engage for tobacco control policy implementation. So there's obviously some clarity that some groups need to have around that. But I think in general, the government is open to move forward. I've tabled it and hopefully will be considered in the meeting of the Environment Ministers next week, where I've requested them as a group to go to their health counterparts, because I genuinely believe that getting Australia's position from a health perspective, maybe Belgium's wrong. I don't think they are, but I'd love to see a report with an Australian, Commonwealth Australian logo that says we've also checked the recommendation and advice from WHO. We've also done the research, and we agree in Australia that this is an option that should be considered and phased out over time, and leave it for the environment departments to then determine what's the correct legislation and measure to do that implementation.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll let you get on with your day. Thanks so much for joining us today for World No Tobacco Day, and I hope the rest of the treaty negotiations go well.
Thank you. We haven't even actually got to the first part yet, unfortunately. We're still debating whether or not there's going to be voting rights and how those voting rights are going to happen, and we expect there's going to be a vote on, if there should be a vote on how to vote this morning.
No.
So it's very procedural.
The ultimate bureaucracy. Okay, so let's thank Shannon again for his time.